for the third time. Facebook and technology today are not my friend, but I'm thinking positively. I'm going to tell you what makes a good supervision contract today. So I know I usually do this at 9:30. I may not have a whole lot of watchers, but that's okay. Maybe there are some folks who would love to join us, but they can't do it until 10 and they're getting to watch today. So yay. New viewers, always a good thing. And you know we always store these Facebook Lives in our media file. How do you find that? You go up here and you click more. You'd go down to Files and Media, click Video, and you can find all of the Thursday 30 Facebook Lives stored there for you. And you can also go to our YouTube channel, Kate Walker Training, Counselor Education, and I put them up there. It just takes a little bit longer. We're usually about a month behind because we're just like that. We're a little bit of a procrastinator. So I say we because I work with my kiddo, Ridgely, and some of you have gotten to talk with her too. I promise I don't have a mouse in my pocket and I just say we all the time. But you never know. How are we working? Awesome. All right. Audio is working. I get to do my favorite part all over again. I'm going to welcome 23 new badasses to Kate Walker Training, Texas Counselors Creating Badass Businesses. So let us welcome Sarah Wortman, Natalie Vandeveer Buick, Amanda Turner, Brianna Morato, Christina Segura, Betty Coe, Mimi Beatty Zotsky, Medina Anas, Danica Anaya, Selena Ali, Mishmash, Victor Vergara, Shannon Fowden Champion, Jennifer Pinkerton, Vic Doss, Sarah Spencer, Elsa Bear, Victoria Sena, Jules Parkin, Kristen Diaz, Pedro An, Julie Wilcott, and Jordan McDonald Morin. Welcome. Now let's get to work. Why do I talk about supervision and supervision contracts this time of year? Hey, Vider, nice to meet you. Or Victor, good to see you. Oh my gosh, you're from my Sam Houston class. I'm so glad you're here. Why do I talk about it this time of year? Because at the Texas Counseling Association Professional Growth Conference in November, my thing is usually talking about supervision. Sometimes I'm talking about it with graduate students. Sometimes I'm talking about it with supervisors. I'm an LPC, LMFT supervisor, and I teach the training to become an LPC or LMFT and or supervisor in Texas online, completely online. I happen to think my course is the best on the planet, but I know there are lots of great people out there doing the training to become a 40-hour supervisor to become a supervisor in Texas. So one of the things we teach our new supervisors is how to create a kick-ass supervision contract. So if you're a graduate student and you're watching this, awesome, go tell your friends, because Dr. Summer Allen and I will be doing some Zoom calls this semester talking about this very thing. Dr. Allen is going to talk about the transition from graduate student to LPC associate. I talk about the supervision piece, and together we put on a 1-hour presentation, and I really hope your universities have been talking about it with you. If they haven't, that's okay. Just put in the thread that you would like the link. We're trying to limit it to graduate students because we only have space for 100 people to join, and the last one was pretty packed. So if you're interested in seeing the full Zoom call with Dr. Allen and myself, just put it in the link below, and I'm happy, in the thread below, and I'm happy to get you the link. So the things I'm going to go through today are on my mind because this is just a supervision time of year for me. I'm going to present at the Texas Counseling Association Professional Growth Conference in November with Dr. Salmonson, and I'm going to present on my own, and it's all about supervision. So when I talk about what makes a good supervision contract, what can be confusing is this idea, okay, I thought the contract was the thing I turned into the state. Nope. That's your supervision paperwork, and you turn it in as part of your application. Before you can become an LPC associate, one of the many, many steps that we talk about in our Zoom call, in addition to filing your fees, turning in your application, taking your sex trafficking course, all the stuff, you have to have an agreement with a supervisor. So you've got to do some interviewing and looking around. Good news, because there are no limits for technology for LPC associates and some limits for LMFT associate supervisees. You can pretty much get a supervisor wherever you want. You're not limited to just your area. So if you're a graduate student in your last semester or so, you should be starting that process of looking for a fabulous supervisor. If you're a supervisor and you're watching this, I'm so glad you're here, because I truly, truly believe you are the key to filling the gaps in mental health access in rural Texas. So thank you. Thank you for being here. So what are some things to watch out for? Well, in my presentation with Dr. Allen, the first thing I say is any supervisor who is careless with their liability will be careless with yours. And that's just a rule of thumb. So when I talk about what makes a good contract, remember this is your agreement with your supervisor, and it explains everything from when you'll meet to how much it'll cost, to what to do in case of an emergency, to who has the files if something happens to your supervisor. When you look at things that really are important, number one, what you need to realize, LPC associates and future LPC associates, Texas took away limits on the number of supervisees a supervisor could have back in 2017. LMFT associates, there are still limits. Your supervisor can't have more than, I believe it's 6 supervisees. That's just a good rule of thumb. Supervisors, your caseload grows exponentially with each supervisee you take on. So right now, like for instance, I'm a private practitioner. I have, maybe 10 direct hours a week, and that's enough. That's enough for my brain. But when I have a supervisee, now my 10 grows by her 10. So now my caseload is 20. And then if I have another supervisee, and let's say they have 20 people on their caseload, now my 10 is joined by her 10, which is joined by his 20. My caseload grows because I either share liability if I'm an LMFT supervisor, or I have the same liability if I'm an LPC supervisor with my supervisees. So number one, good rule of thumb when you're interviewing supervisors, don't pick the supervisor with 100 supervisees, right? It's a lot to keep track of up here, right? A supervisor has a lot of stuff they have to do, everything from making sure you do the right thing, to teaching the rules, to following up with your sites, to maintaining good communication, to evaluating you, to all the paperwork. So when you're interviewing a new supervisor, don't pick one that has everybody on your agency staff, right? I know everybody expected me to say, well, no, cost is the most important thing. Free supervision, if you're supervising with somebody who has 10 to 12 to 15 supervisees, it's a scary thing for me, all right? So a lot of what I talk about, again, in the rules, LPC supervisors, you can have as many supervisees as you want, but I look at best practices in addition to rules. Second thing to look for when you are going to have a new supervisor, when you're interviewing your first supervisor, most important thing, in fact, I probably should have said this first, is your supervisor's availability. Availability for a supervisor is the number one source of direct liability for a supervisor, okay? There's always indirect liability. Your supervisor doesn't know what you're doing in that room with your client, right? That's, we train you to make critical decisions under duress when nobody's looking, right? That's what we train you to do. So that indirect liability, that's a given. But if your supervisor is unavailable, that's huge. You've got to have a supervisor who is available. Now, let me give you some scenarios. If you work in an agency and your supervisor just kind of says, hey, everything sounds great, good job, I'll sign those notes later, and that's your hour, not okay. If your supervisor just says, you know what, we're just going to always meet as a group, okay? That's more than 2 people, by the way. not okay. If your supervisor is only available 1 hour a week, not okay, right? And supervisors, let's be real here. I know when I was a supervisor, and I still am, I have one supervisee, hopefully she's watching right now. I saw that if I only saw my supervisees, and I said, hey, you know what? The only hours you can come to supervision is between 8 and 5, right? Those are not, or rather 8 and 3, right? Because we all know prime time for clients is 3 to 7. So how many supervisees are going to be able to come and see me during those weird hours, 8 to 3? So when the technology limits were lifted, it was awesome, because then my supervisees could see me in the car, they could go out on their lunch break, they could find an office and lock it, and then we could have our supervision during the day. But if your supervisor says the only time I can see you is at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, well, what happens if one of you has to cancel? What happens if you travel? What happens if just an emergency comes up? LPC associates must have 4 hours of supervision each month. If you get less than 4 hours of supervision, you lose every direct hour for that month. So in most cases, 20, 40, 60, 80, that can be up to 80 direct hours a month, and you would just lose it, right? You would lose them. Hours aren't like cell phone minutes. They don't roll over to the next month. You can't bank 5 or 6 supervision hours in a month and hope that, it's gonna stay, in place. It doesn't work like that. LMFT associates, similar situation, but you lose hours by the week when you don't show up. You cannot miss a weekly supervision unless a good cause is shown, right? So this is so important because things do come up. You want to make sure your supervisor gives you a no-show policy as well. If you no-show, if you're late, if you're consistently not showing up to supervision on time, you need to know if there are financial penalties. You need to know if your supervisor is going to be able to do maybe a 2-hour supervision LPC associates or a 3-hour supervision LPC associates. LMFT associates, it doesn't work like that. But LMFT associates, you must get 200 supervision hours in 24 months. You do the math, right? You can't do that at 1 hour a week. So your supervisor better be able to do that math for you. And so, of course, you can still roll over some supervision hours, LMFT associates, not you LPC associates. LMFT associates, you can roll over some supervision hours, but 200 hours, okay, in 24 months, and 50% of those, no more than 100 of those can be in a group setting. So if all the hours you rolled over from grad school are group, guess what? You're done with group. Well, maybe not completely done, but a lot of them are going to be gone because you can't have more than 100, okay? So supervisor availability. Number 3, your records, right? In your supervision contract, you please have a records custodian in case something happens to you, supervisor. Supervisees, you want to do this the smart way? You take notes for every supervision session. You ask your supervisor to sign that. Then go to an old-fashioned copy machine or upload it into a Dropbox so both of you leave each supervision with a copy of your notes. I know some folks watching this back in the day when the LPC board meetings were open, we heard some really sad stories about LPC associates trying to upgrade, but something had happened to their supervisor, right? They had passed away or they'd moved, and oh my gosh, I can't get my notes. What do I do? LPC boards usually, sorry, if there's no documentation, if there's no evidence, we can't help you. So always, and I'm talking to supervisees now, always make sure you have a copy of your log and a note, and ask your supervisor to sign it, and then each of you copy so you have the same record each time you meet. And in the supervision contract, make sure your supervisor has a supervision records custodian, so you know what happens if something happens to your supervisor, who's going to have your records, okay? Now, I'm going to say a few words about the thing that's on everybody's mind: independent practice. Self-employed LPC associates, LMFT associates, you can tune out for a second. LPC associates, there is nothing in the rules right now that says you can own your own practice, okay? And it's looking like in February-ish, 2022, that rule about being self-employed will come to pass. Yay! I'm super happy about that because I know you will fill the gaps in rural Texas. Go do that. Here's the thing. The term independent practice applies to your supervision status, okay? An independent practitioner is a clinician who does not need supervision. LPC associate, you need supervision. You can't practice without supervision. If you're working somewhere and you're kind of in between supervisors, you are literally practicing illegally. So you must have a supervisor. That means you won't meet the criteria for independent practice or independent practitioner. That's okay, because again, the rule that's on the books, and we need to look for this in the Texas Register. I'll make sure to give everybody a heads up as soon as I see it. The rule will go into the Texas Register. We can all do our public comments at that time before everything becomes encoded, hopefully in 2022. And I'll post some more information on our thread that can just let you know my thoughts and what I know about this new rule coming up. So again, independent practice means your supervision status, not your ability to hang a shingle, all right? So keep that on the front of your mind, and I will talk more about that. Finally, I got to tell you what's on my mind. I had a consultation this week with someone whose supervisee didn't like what she had to say, okay? Now, let me lay the foundation for you. This supervisor is an awesome supervisor. She's in this group. If she's not, she's in another group that I have. And she had some policies that were conditions for being her supervisee. This supervisee signed those policies. And one of the policies concerned social media. Folks, there is no rule about social media. I mean, other than having boundary issues, right? We don't do boundary issues on social media. But this supervisor wanted her supervisee to lock down their profile. Folks, if your supervisor wants you to do something in a particular way and you sign, yes, I'll do it that way, then you got to do it that way. That's why you interview your supervisor. You want to find somebody that fits you, that you're compatible with. If you're just going to take the one the agency throws at you, if you're going to just take one who's the cheapest, if you're going to just take one because they're the only ones in town, that's on you. But this particular supervisor, who I highly respect, had some excellent rules to protect her supervisees. I mean, it was to protect their world and their boundaries, right? And to protect their marketing efforts. This supervisee, when they were called on it, didn't like that. And it became a problem. So I decided to work it into this little talk today, because when you sign your supervision contract with your supervisor, this person that you're going to basically have a once a week coffee with for the next 2 to 5 years, or 18 months to 5 years if you're an LPC associate, 24 months to 7 years if you're an LMFT, did I say that right? LMFT associate. Then you need to understand their philosophy, what they think about practicing, what they think about marketing, right? You've got to make sure, it's like dating, right? You've got to make sure that you're compatible. Once you sign on the dotted line, you're agreeing to your supervisor's policy. They must remediate you before they terminate you. But that supervisor is not going to keep you if you sign something and then do something completely different. Because what does that look like? It looks like you were just doing it out of convenience. You're signing on the dotted line because it's like, oh, hey, finally have a supervisor. Yeah, I'll do all this stuff. And then bam, I'm going to go do whatever I want to do. This is not how you do supervision. Right? So one of the things I'm trying to do, I'm working with TASES, Texas Association for Counselor Education and Supervision. We're going to try to host a social hour during the TCA Professional Growth Conference. And I'm working with some colleagues. I'm really excited about this. We're going to try to have a couple of happy hours at the Professional Growth Conference because you need to meet your supervisor. I want graduate students to come. I want supervisors to come. I want us all to meet, talk, get to know one another, and interview, right? Because your supervisor is someone important in your life. They're going to be your mentor. You got to read everything in the contract. You have to understand what they're putting out there, and they are looking out for your best interest. If you don't believe that, if you don't trust your supervisor, you have no business signing on that line. Now, that's my soapbox, because what I consult with when I have supervisors who consult with me, and I hear situations like this where the supervisee just signed because they needed a supervisor and come on, let's get going with this. It never works out in your favor, right? Your supervisor ultimately has the ability to terminate you. And then what do, right? Then you're working somewhere, you don't have a supervisor, and you have to stop working. You cannot see clients if your supervisor fires you. So this is important, guys. Super important. Next time on the Thursday 30, I'll talk more about specific interview questions. I'll talk about how to contact a supervisor, how to communicate with a supervisor. Supervisors take this as part of their 40-hour training. They understand the relationship. They understand conflict. They understand your developmental level. You guys, graduate students and supervisees to be, I want you to have that same skill set. I want you to be able to navigate working with a supervisor and understanding this is someone you're signing up with because you like the way they're going to mentor you, not because it's just a convenience and you're ready to get started on your hours. All right, that's it. Thanks, guys. You 10 o'clock folks. Thanks for joining me. I hope the technology was great. I hope people go back and watch this again. If you're interested in the Zoom meeting with me and Dr. Allen transitioning from graduate student to LPC associate, LMFT associates, I'm sorry, we're not going to talk a whole lot about that, but LPC associates, yes, we're going to talk a lot about you. Please mention it in the thread for this video and I will make sure you get the link. Also, make sure your supervisor, if you're listening to this and you have a supervisor, is over in the Texas Supervisor Training Facebook page. Our first consultation group meets this Monday, and they need to register. They need to get a ticket. That's it. Go do good things. Let's fill the gaps in mental health access in rural Texas, right? Hashtag counselors for life, hashtag counselors don't quit. See you guys.